Won several national and provincial broadcasting awards and has been awarded honorary doctorates in letters by Memorial University, St. Thomas University, and Nipissing University. Right? Much in demand as a speaker, his mix of insight, humor, and political commentary brings audiences to their feet at events from coast to coast. Ladies and gentlemen, your keynote speaker, Mr. Rex Murphy.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I think the first thing I should do is that, having heard what he said about the quality of this conference, that at this stage you should abandon all hope that it's going to be a first-class one. I'm here in my professional capacity as an anticlimax. I find this a lot when I'm home, whenever I get invited to an intelligent or consequential gathering. Almost always, because Newfoundlanders are so candid, rushes up to me to tell me that, now Rex, don't let this go to your head. The only reason that you're here is that John Crosby is ill. I think we can all agree with that. I also want to say that I'm here today after being only 24 or 34 hours ago in Gander, Newfoundland. So there's a fair amount of distance between here and there, and so if any of the remarks I make tonight drift into any pattern of coherence, I wonder if some of you could come up afterwards and let me know where they were. I thought, by the way, that I was going to be flying into Fort Nelson this afternoon, but obviously that's not the case. All you need is a ukulele and a grass skirt, and you can call this Tahiti. You guys are really ahead of the weather curve. Either that or you have some special arrangement with Al Gore, and I certainly hope that's not the case for everyone's benefit. I wish it were Screech, but it isn't. Again, before I get in anyways mixed into the remarks that I'll claim to be serious, I want to join with the mayor, who gave such an admirable summary of the reasons and background to the award. To add, for what it's worth, I'm a visitor. My congratulations and admiration to the Swain family that are here for the achievement that's represented by that wonderful award that you just received on the part of either father or other relation. That's a first-class thing, and it was very, very good to be present merely to witness it. So congratulations once again. I have several reasons to be grateful to be here. The first and the major one, of course, is that if you are in Fort Nelson, you're not in Toronto. That, in my particular case, is both an intellectual and hygienic improvement. And it also means, and I'll let you in on a few small things before, I wander into what dangerously might be relevance. Around this time of night, if I am back in Toronto, it's my duty at the great fortress of the CBC. They send me down to the lobby, where it's my late night duty to water the ferns and refresh the incense and light the candles that we have there in front of the tofu statue of Bishop Suzuki. You simply cannot imagine how deprived I feel not to be doing that right now. It's also just, again, I really can't. I'm kind of staggered by the great climate here. I was down, as I mentioned to you, in Newfoundland for the last 7 days, actually. And one of my mornings was close to where I live, which is on the southern shore of Newfoundland. Fairly close, by the way, to Witless Bay, which may be the best named town in the entire province. Anyway, I stayed there frequently, as you can probably tell. But one morning we had a day that was something of a parallel to the one you have here. And I went down to a town called Ferryland, F-E-R-R-Y, and it's one of the most gorgeous, it truly is, even by BC standards. This is one of the most gorgeous little coves on the face of the entire earth. I got down there about 8:15 in the morning, and unusual for Newfoundland because we've only usually read about it. There was a great yellow orb in the sky. This is the sun, I understand. And the blue was immaculate. It wasn't speckled by a single cloud. The seagulls were wearing tuxedos. I mean, this was a day, something like paradise before the snake got into it. It was just perfect. And there's 3 old guys on the wharf kind of next to me. I'm staring up in wonderment that such a beauteous scene is even possible. And the old guy kind of strafes the sky with his eye, and he turns to the other 2 that are there. This is God's truth, what he said. He's looking up at this impossible perfection. The weather is ideal. He turns to the other 2 and he says, boys, he says, we're gonna pay for this. We're not an optimistic crowd back home. And while I'm on this, I'm sorry to do this. I'm obviously having a really good time, but I don't know if you are. I'm having an Oprah spasm here now. I'm about to share with you. It was down in, it just ran into my head, it was down in the same area, Witless Bay Bulls. There's one of those small Foodland stores. And I was in there trying to pick up some stale donuts and whatever goes with them. And I spotted one of the old ladies. And in Newfoundland, we have a really hard crowd. And I'm afraid of them. Once they hit 80, and if they're under 95 pounds, they have more moral force than 1,000,000 captains of vessels and skippers. I am afraid of them. Anyway, this one, she must have been 82, or she spotted me, and I knew she did. And she rushes over, and as you can tell, I'm not very imposing, but this is one of the very few times that anyone has ever looked up at me. And she looked up at me, and she said, you know, she said, you, meaning me. She said, you. She said, you're the guy. She said, you're the guy on television. And then, you know, I let my guard down, and because every person on camera, by the way, is a child. Vanity is our only impulse. Here she is, she recognized me, and so I said, well, ma'am, that's really nice. No, she said, you're the guy, she said, on television. She said, I see you. She said, I can't understand a single word you says. And this is where I tripped up really badly, because I got, to be frank, condescending, you know, metaphorically patting her on the head. And I said to her, now, ma'am, I said, you know, that can't be true. I said, you must understand some of it. And she said, no, she said, I don't understand a single word you says, but keep it up. Ladies and gentlemen, the best compliment I ever had. I will have a couple of things to say that are actually connected to the conference, but I'm going to continue digressing for yet another while. It's very difficult, by the way, to digress if you haven't already begun. I mean, how do you leave a path if you're not on it? But you get by drifting. I just want to let you know something of the quality of what I'm pleased to call my mind by giving you the one relevant portion of an otherwise wasted biography. And that's to tell you that about, oh God, now it's almost 25 years ago, in a period of near starvation and definite unemployment, I ended up, and this is true again, I ended up as a candidate for the Newfoundland and Labrador Liberal Party. My name is Rex, and I once ran as a Newfoundland Liberal. Now, it's not the kind of thing you actually willingly declare in front of a fairly moral audience, but being a member of the Newfoundland and Labrador Liberal Party is not exactly a felony, but it operates in the same plane of social esteem, roughly, as throwing rocks at a convent, or stealing sheep for the purposes of carnal experiment. Newfoundland is a very lonely place. And we have some spectacular sheep. No, that's not quite true. But it is true that something had happened, and the story is true in its fundamentals. The Liberals, back home anyway, are not very good at mathematics. That seems to be a national trait. And when there was an election already in progress, and they discovered that they'd missed a riding. I mean, there were only 48 at the time, but they'd missed one. And our elections are fairly brief for sanitary reasons. And they were about 10 days into the election when they realized, oh my God, we only got 47 candidates and there's 48 districts. And the one that was empty happened to be the one where I was starving to death and out of work. So I got a call, you wouldn't know the name of the then leader. He was the guy before, here's the name you would remember. He was the guy before Clyde Wells. Remember Clyde?
Oh, yeah.
He was a cross between Oliver Cromwell and the Tooth Fairy. And this guy phoned me and he said, now look, he said, we forgot this, he was candid. He said, we forgot the damn district. And he said, it's going to be really embarrassing on election night. Either way, that when it comes to around to Placentia, the Liberals just don't have anyone there. Now he said, we don't have a hope in hell of winning it. So we don't care who runs. And we know you're half starving. So give us your name, and they made a proposition to me. You give us your name, we won't give you any funding, but we will give you all the Kentucky Fried Chicken you can eat. You can see the choice I had to make. The Liberal Party or Kentucky Fried. Malnutrition or bad taste. Anyway, I ended up, I ran. Again, I'm sorry for this digression. I really should be talking about the conference, but I'm fascinated by my own mistakes. I ran, I lost, but I didn't lose by much. Lost by 140 votes. And then, because I was still hungry and they were cutting out the chicken, they said, come into the legislature, and I did. And I spent a year and a half, working with the opposition as it then was, and I also was the person actually responsible. I did this once. I hope there are no children here. I wrote the questions for question period for the Liberal opposition. I designed question period for 17 months, which if you go to Newfoundland and watch question period, you'll understand essentially that it's a kind of protracted lobotomy without the benefit of anesthetic. You have people there asking questions, certainly when I was writing them, that had no idea what they were about, to a bunch in the government who didn't care to even listen to them, and for the benefit of the public that was utterly disinterested in both parties. It's a classic case of futility. And I gotta wrap this up. After that, there was a by-election, and because I was the only piece of furniture on salary, they asked me to run in the by-election in St. John's. And that was, you'll know this was the birth riding of John Crosby. So it was the kind of Bethlehem temple of Newfoundland progressive conservatism. And the thought that a Liberal could win there was just unimaginable. So naturally, they volunteered me. And there were three of us who ran. I'll wrap this up now. There were three of us. There was me, there was an ex-mayor of St. John's, and there was an unemployed figure skater from Labrador City, which is a kind of metaphysical condition. The only triple axles in Labrador are on the big trucks. And I got to make this brief. So the election went on, and I lost again. This time I lost by about 8,000 votes, compared to 160 just 17 months previous. Never let it be said that Newfoundlanders are not quick learners. But that wasn't the worst of it. I told you there were three candidates for a reason, and that is that on election night, when the CBC announced that I had lost, and they were really eager to do that because I had crossed the Great Divide, that wasn't the real humiliation, nor was it the 8,000 thumping. The Newfoundlanders looked at me and they said no. They said no with great violence. They said, get out of here. Don't even come back. But out of three candidates, I came in fourth. The unemployed figure skater was no longer unemployed. He won. The ex-mayor came in second. Now, during the time of the by-election, and it's true, there was a small real estate boom going on in St. John's. And I know there are Newfoundlanders here because we infect every portion of the globe. And I know we're here. And so you'll know what I'm talking about. The local firm wasn't very big on television ads, the real estate firm, but they were big on their little posters. And it's Tony Murray and Associates. And if you're from St. John's, that's as familiar to you as your own family name. So on the night of the by-election, here's how it worked out. Unemployed figure skater, ex-mayor, Tony Murray and Associates came in third. I'm the only person who ran for elected office in the history of Canada that's lost to a real estate sign. So now you have some idea of the quality of person that you've chosen to address you here this evening. By the way, congratulations on the opening of the center. I understand this is the first major function that it serves. It is glorious. I appreciate the food that has been served by the wonderful class back there in the back. It was all first rate. I also appreciate, despite the fact, as I say, I've sprung from the other side of the continent, that I am here. And it's not only because of that sprinkling of errant Newfoundlanders that are even now plotting your downfall in the audience. I'm really grateful to be here because this is one of the few venues, and it's in the right place, right part of the country. It's one of the few venues, one of the few conferences where the two streams of thought that I have to suggest to you about the only venue there is to give them. The first one is, and I'm not playing up to you, it's meant. I've said it in print once or twice, but never again quite as directly. In 1993-94, my place, Newfoundland, was savaged. I won't do any detail because time is precious. We had the closure of the 450-year-old cod fishery, the definitional occupation of the entire province, the only reason why outports exist. And if Newfoundland has some particular strain and temperament and culture and exuberance, it's entirely because of how Newfoundland was built on the outports and around the fishery. And in a single day, the entire inshore fishery, 31,000 families, an historic occupation ceased to be. And as I explained this afternoon when flying over here, if you wanted a proportional number to understand the shock of such an attack on the entire history and culture of an entire place, then imagine if it was Toronto, and some morning you picked up Globe and Mail or National Post and you read that overnight, and I mean overnight, that 660,000 people have lost their jobs. Well, the world would be spinning on its reverse axis to the present minute. That was the scale of the devastation in Newfoundland. And what happens after people lose jobs to which they have been accustomed both by tradition, association, skill, and in many cases, by the generations? I encountered a lot of the people, who at various ages, this went from 20 to near 60, were suddenly no longer working. And because there is some stoicism in the Newfoundland character, they sought work elsewhere. Some of them weren't all that fortunate. You may think I'm making it up. I'm telling you I'm not. I met a man on the great northern peninsula, who had an ancient house, 4 or 5 generations old, belonging to his family. He had 7 kids. He was about 53. He sold his house for 9 airplane tickets to Hamilton. That's how rough it was when the whole damn thing closed down. I'll only use one illustration to make the point of how forceful unemployment on a mass scale can be. And I will tell you this as a truth. We had another strain of good luck. On our own side of the coast, that offshore finally began to play in. But the offshore of Newfoundland was not up to the scale, nor could so many people that were associated with a different industry immediately go into it. So it absorbed some, but by no means a major proportion. Newfoundlanders, as they have done in the past, they scattered to the compass, but mainly, they headed out west, and mainly again, they ended up lower high in some part of the oil and gas industry of this country, as opposed to of this region, but you know what I mean. So many of our clan, and Nova Scotia, and we know there are other places, but I'll speak from personal reference. Do you know, you people who are in the oil and gas industry, have you been told often enough just how much misery, just how much personal and domestic tragedy, just how much hardship that would have been visited upon many of the numbers of those 31,000 that were forestalled, that was stopped in its tracks, because so many people found useful, gainful work in the western provinces? Do you know that the oil and gas industry mitigated, it softened, it qualified the greatest historic shock that Newfoundland and Labrador in 450 years of being clouted around the side of the head has ever endured? I hear, and you hear too, all the times of the criticisms. By the way, I'm not involved in the oil and gas industry, but I hear the criticism, how reckless you can be, and what torments you might be to the environment, and the greed and the compulsion. Does anyone ever draw up the inventory on the other side of the scale? Aside from me saying it now, and perhaps a couple of others that you may have heard, how many have told you that the social misery index of Newfoundland was greatly, almost miraculously alleviated by the simple fact that there was work of substantial value, and that, thank God, within the confines of this country, of this federation, people from one stricken province were welcome, and they were, in other provinces. There's something to mark down when the great cliche about the juggernaut of the oil and gas industry, of energy behemoths and giants. Think occasionally of the good that has been done. And I don't mind, I don't regard it as coy at all in saying directly to this room or to any of the companies that employed them, thank God you were there. My closest friend, my truly closest friend, he's about 7 years younger than I was at the time, was about 52. He'd worked for 23 years. He suddenly didn't work anymore. 3 years later, I won't name him, his marriage was gone. His house was gone. He was living in the basement in a small village called Torrescold. He was getting up to 55. And I'll tell you where he would have been if he hadn't got the ticket to Alberta and some upgrade certificates in terms of his own education. By now he'd be buying beer by the double caseload, and he'd be a sot in some damn basement. Instead, he ends up out in Alberta. I'll skip the intermediate stages. He goes to work way north of Edmonton. Bit by bit, he climbs the ladder. And now he's in some African country, earning money on a scale that you cannot believe, reunited with his family. That's just one. And I bet there were 10,000 others who were caught on that brink going either one way or the other. And was it not for the fact that this industry was there, just think of the damage that would have been done. That's personal. That comes from my province. And I think you should know that. The second stream, I don't need to do it quite as urgently, but I think you need to hear it. The second stream of thought that I have for this industry in particular and in this country, is to take stock of yourselves. I know that there seems to be, and I'm speaking as candidly as I can, I do not understand it. The central business that maintains the structure of the country that we own, the main element that keeps this country at the level of development and prosperity that we have, is the possession at its center of the core resources of energy. All that we hold valuable comes from that. And if it can be produced to some degree by ourselves, if the one element that more than any other unites or defines what we call modern civilized life, it is the fact that we can power our homes, our cities, our cars, our hospitals, our everything. Almost as a joke, I mentioned to the lads this afternoon that I've been rereading Moby Dick. I have a taste for tragedies. And I've been reading The Great Hunt out of Nantucket in Bedford. I mean, this is slightly a joke, but it's not a joke at all. And you read of this tremendous hunt for the sperm whale, the noblest animal of the entire universe, mightiest, most majestic, and for 100 years, the slaughter, and there is no other word for it, the slaughter of this majestic, this creature of the sea's own dominion, Leviathan of the Bible, the slaughter that went on, the butchering of one of nature's finest statements. Do you know what stopped? Why they killed him? They killed him for oil. Oil for lamps and candelabras in castles. All of Europe, the aristocracy, the governments, the functioning of 19th century civilization came from the sperm oil of the great Leviathans. Do you know who saved the most whales in the history of the world? It isn't Greenpeace. It's probably Texaco. I say to you, that's only half a joke. The greatest slaughter, what is the most emblematic thing in modern environmentalism? Where did it begin? The great voyages of Save the Whale. This is history. Moby Dick is as close to history as anything can get. And it was only when the ingenuity, the science, the industry, the technology of releasing oil, and in this case gas, releasing energy from the earth, that we ceased to stab and maul for days. One of the great animals, she is a mammal, one of the great animals of the entire creation. You know, it's a hard thing to say because it seems so strange that the oil and gas industry has saved the whale. Dear God, what a story. I'll go one further. That's, as I said, secondary. Think of it another way. I've been saying I've been in Newfoundland for a couple of reasons. I went by, I'm a guy who ruined his mind very early on. I took arts in university. And I went by the Come By Chance refinery. Everyone knows about it. I went by the Come By Chance refinery. Last week, I got right up to the gates. By the way, someone should talk to somebody else about security, but that's another story. They built that roughly in 1966. I'm not interested in the politics that went surrounded it and all the stuff. This is 2011. And I looked at that refinery with my well-educated arts mind, and I just looked at it. And I saw the connections, the pipes, the wiring. This thing was 500,000 times more elaborate than the intricacies inside the damn pyramids. Do you know how impressive it is that thing, this is 50 years old, could simply be built in any other time or place but our own, because we have become so inured to the miracles of our age. Just that rusty, in a sense, it's still in use, by the way, just that hulk of a half-century-old refinery, to construct that. It's miracle. I also know, Come By Chance is close, you'll know this, to Bull Arm. Have any of you, because you're in the industry, have you been up close to an offshore oil rig? Do you, again, to the simpleton, looking at that thing and understanding it has been put together by the brains of men and women, that science and engineering and industry have combined to make a mechanism that can withstand the gales of the North Atlantic and feed the most precious life stuff to modern society that we know. The energy that keeps it as it is. Do you understand the miracles in which you are daily involved? In any other context, in any other time, we would almost, if we could get over the idea of self-regard, and God help us as Canadians if we should have a fit of self-regard, if you were to stand back from that and just look and say, look what we've done. Look what you've done in Alberta. Look what you've done in British Columbia. The entire wonder of the 21st century is built on the core element of that which keeps it going. And I do not, as I said, I'm speaking out loud my own thought. I really don't understand why it is that somehow or other an association with this industry is supposed to be a shadowy business. Something like me joining the Liberal Party. You know something? It is utterly upside down. I mentioned what I regard as the elimination of so much social misery in Newfoundland by the existence of this industry. Let me go much wider. The world right now is in one of the rockiest states that it has seen since the turn of the last century, 1900. We have not seen such upheaval. You have famine. You have civil wars rampant. You have the greatest cataclysm and uncertainty and anxiety in the financial markets that we have seen since 1929, and it may even be deeper. We have the combined cynicism of whole populations about their politicians. Look what happened in England not 3 or 4 weeks ago. What goes on in Greece. We have moments of social and economic unrest of a kind that you really do have to go back to the 30s and some unfortunate states in order to even get a parallel. And in the midst of all of that, and let us pray that it continues, there is one small island of partial exemption. Canada is not roiled, as is the States even. Canada is not rocked in any kind of comparative sense by the civil unrest of other societies. Even our natural disasters compared to those things that happen so sadly and with such tragedy to other nations, even those are moderated. And we seem to have, because of either innate modesty or something else, been protected from the turmoil and wind of the great financial collapse. Well, you know, one of the reasons for that, and I don't know why it isn't acceptable to say it out loud every now and then, a healthy economy is the greatest shield there is against all of the disorders that I have just named. And if calamity or misfortune does befall us, some amount of wealth and energy are the quickest routes out of calamity or disorder. We are the country that we are because the generations before us, the ones who were the pioneers, did the labor, did the hard stuff, did the grit, did all of those awful, perilous, dangerous, and superlatively adventurous things so that the generations that followed them could have a hall as splendid as this in which to hold a conference, and that we could have a body politic so stable that the worst angers are the angers between the political party to and fro. We don't have armies running through the streets and tanks hunting down citizens. We have so much. We have so much, and I'm not speaking purely of material wealth. The wealth undergirds, industry undergirds, energy undergirds the placid and temperate nature of the country. Once you expunge want, once you drive away the basic pressures on people of shelter, of food, of some dignity of employment, and by the way, never underestimate that. There's no blow save the death of a loved one worse to a person of pride than the loss of job. Dignity and earning your keep are synonyms. There is so much in Canada because we have the engine. We have the engine to supply all of those other things that we hail as our great social virtues, from health systems to elections, despite how funny they may be, that work, to universities, to school systems, to hospitals? Do you think we would have the range of Medicare and the sophistication of medical activity, medical technology that we have now, if it were not for the most basic elements? I mean, even my father, who is no longer here, he could not comprehend what is now possible in modern medicine. He grew up in Newfoundland in the 30s and 40s. When if you saw a hospital, it was a picture in a magazine. It was not a real thing. In 50 years, this country, we have so much. So my message to you, and it's a real one, is that I know, again, everybody is into what they do for their own motivations. I know you're not saints. And every company is into it for the exhilaration of doing what it does. And it's in it for profit. And it's in it also to beat the other guy. I know all the mixed motivations. But there's also a residue. There's a substratum of reasons. You're into this because you have family. You're into this because you are attached to this part of the country. You are attached to the country as a whole. You're into this because you got ignited in either university or college, or going out on your own and seeing in nature that, guided by experience and education and technology, there were things in the land or in the sea that could be put to beneficial and productive use for the advancement of Canadian society. So, restore, this is my last point, restore to yourselves the sense of wonder about what it is simply that you do. I mentioned the oil rigs. I mean, I know about the tragedy too, but no life is without friction, and no pursuit on this globe that comes without cost. But just think how far we have come in so swift a time. It is unimaginable. And Canadian society is one of the most stable, one of the most temperate, one of the most fortunate on the face of the earth. Don't buy the indictments of your enemies, and don't buy the rage that is artificially stirred up against what is one of the most cardinal elements of any functioning society in this century. You do not wish to give up the advanced medicines that we have. We do not wish to give up the universities. We do not wish to give up these wonderful rural towns and villages. Fort Nelson doesn't exist without industry. I know too many towns back in Newfoundland that don't exist now at all. Understand how large a part, even if it is beyond the scope of any corporate mission statement, that this industry does, and cease this kind of apologetics that seems to attend any mention of oil or gas, as if it is some hideous quantity that we should be embarrassed about. That's garbage, or it's hypocrisy, or it is both. No one turns off their own heater. They want you to turn off theirs. That's the game that's being played. So my simple thing is this. I think we have a great country. I think we are shielded from a lot of the storms of the world. And I think a lot of the reason why we are shielded and why we do have a great country is because we have the ingenuity, the enterprise, the drive, the capital, the technology, the science, and the will to extend what it is we have, to protect the best elements of it, to continue generating the wealth that will pass it improved to yet another generation. It wouldn't be right to end on quite so serious a note. And to the Newfoundlanders, again, I got to apologize, because I'm going to tell, as a concluding remark, a true story that I've told about 9,000 times before. I like it so much, there's one reason, and the second reason is I can't find a better one. But I do like it, and it's not relevant to anything that I've just said. It's a waste of your time and possibly mine. It goes back to 1997. We Newfoundlanders celebrated that year 500 years of John Cabot leaving Bristol, England, heading for Beijing. He ended up in Bonavista. Vista. And that's the kind of thing we celebrate. Which may explain some of the premiers we've elected. I mean, I can remind you, that even in 1497, it was tricky to mistake Beijing and Bonavista. Bonavista didn't even have a Chinese restaurant till 1970. Okay? It's this story, I don't know that it makes the story any better, but I always have to say it's true. It is true. It's on television. NTV back home has the tape. We invited the Queen to come over. She said yes. I'm going to make this quick. She came over. I was in Toronto at the time. They set me down with a camera crew. There were 50, there were 60, there were 100 camera crews from all over the world. And they got down to Bonavista and it was a disaster. There was rain, of course. There was wind. There was sleet. There was snow. There was more rain. There were icebergs. There was rain again. It was snow. It was June the 24th. What do you expect? But you see the point? We couldn't see her. I mean, the cameras were focusing, sleet, snow. You didn't. She could have been home. And they realized that you couldn't see her. So they said, we got to fix this. I mean, it's not right. We dragged her all the way over from Buckingham Palace. And no one knows she's in Newfoundland. So they made a deal. They went to the mayor of St. John's. They brought her in to St. John's. And they said, look, we can't depend on you can't depend on the weather. Dear God, what a sentence. They said, we're going to do it indoors. We're going to bring her indoors. And again, the Newfoundlanders will know. And they picked a building that everyone in Newfoundland knows. It's the Purity Biscuit Factory. Now, all you guys know about Tim Hortons. I know you do. Tim Hortons multiplied by 10 in terms of familiarity, and you got Purity biscuits back in Newfoundland. I'm Catholic. I grew up on Purity round milk lunch biscuits. My friend Leo White, he's Protestant. And besides going to hell, yeah, he is. He grew up on Purity square milk lunch biscuits. See? Didn't matter though. Protestant, Catholic, atheist, you got your Purity biscuit either way. They're universal in that's the only point you have to remember. They're going to take her to the Purity Biscuit Factory and that's all they do. So she comes in and she's on a dais, something like this, like the stage. And in front of her there are 5 or 6 great steel vats. And each one of them has 1,300 or 2,000 pounds worth of biscuit dough being blended by huge electric blenders, and there's a guy with a white coat, and he's got the little buttons that he can push to get the old biscuit dough being blended. So she's on the platform, and she's got that purse, so she's on a tilt. So, she's tilting her way across the stage, and she gets to where Buddy is. It's true. And it's Her Majesty the Queen of all the Englands. And she gets to where Buddy is. I remember where she is, because I spent a fair bit of time telling you. She looks, well, she doesn't have to look up, she's already looking up. She looks up at Buddy, and she says, I can't do the accent. And she says, and what are you making, sir? There was a pause as long as the Reformation. And finally, Buddy looked back down at her and he said, $12.50 an hour, ma'am. True. My sympathies were with the House of Windsor. Well, as I said, it's not relevant, but let me wrap up very, very simply. In certain ways, Fort Nelson here, I mentioned Gander over and over tonight. Fort Nelson is Gander. The rural areas of this country are Gander, and vice versa. It goes all the way. These things only have the vitality. They only generate the culture that we so admire, and we actually so love, if you want to say it. The spirit of the country comes in a mix. It's a dynamic relationship between city and country. But there's something about the occupations and the hazards of living and dealing with the great wide parts of this country, like it is in Newfoundland, the outports, that generates more and more of what we call in our more poetic moments the soul of the country. But each of these places they cannot exist simply on their splendor of landscape, on the beauty of the sky, or the wonderful contours of the land. All of these things are wonderful. They are a spiritual asset. They really are. But they are only maintained and preserved on the back of real industry. Industry that has intelligence, that is not the wanton caricature of 19th century propaganda. 21st century industry has conscience. You have your villains, but you have your saints too. No one today wishes to degrade the inheritance of the outside world. No one. But this vast kind of twisted turn that attempts to make what is so cardinal to the achievements of our civilization something of a bad name or a bad word, that truly, truly escapes me. So at your conference here, understand with some measure of confidence, understand what it is you do, understand the contribution you make. Don't get puffed up over it. But as I said earlier in this talk, don't buy, do not buy into, do not accept the indictments of those who do not like you. Take care of yourselves.